Alright everyone, Rand Paul is once again the only sane person in the Senate. Bernie Sanders being the least sane, which is like, sort of self-explanatory. One of my own senators, yeah, wonderful dude. He puts forth a bill. He should have known Rand would stand in the way of this, by the way, so I'm not sure why he did this, but it was a bill, basically, the Senate wanted to condemn the nation of Russia for election meddling. It's purely diplomatic, it's purely symbolic, the Senate can't actually do much of anything. And Rand, I believe, is also trying to stand in the way of increasing the sanctions and stuff. He comes up. The bill requires unanimous consent, which means every senator has to vote for it. Rand Paul says no. He's like, hey, it's dangerous rhetoric. It's too hateful towards Russia. It doesn't make any sense. It's hyperbolic. Here's the big thing. For a moment, let's do an interesting thing. Let's assume that every claim being made by the intel agencies, by John McCain, the warmonger, and by the Democrats is right. Let's say that their ultimate tale is true. The Russians managed to influence the election with, like, Facebook posts and stuff. Now, I've seen no evidence that it flipped the election. Even Mueller's not even claiming that. At this point, the claim is not that Trump colluded with Russia. The claim now is just that Russia interfered. It's considerably watered down over time. Now the deep state's just saying, yeah, they bought Facebook and stuff. Okay, let's look at what we know. Assuming that their tale is true. The Kremlin gave Russian trolls some money, Russian nationals within the U.S., money to design memes for Bernie Sanders and Trump, essentially, joking about Clinton, attacking the intel agencies themselves with some of the memes, talking about the deep state and stuff, to the tune of maybe a few million. That they had an operative who managed to penetrate into the middle rungs of the NRA. For what purpose, I'm not sure. Like, I'm not sure what the point is. So, in other words, the Russians want us to be well-armed. That story doesn't make sense, but let's assume it's true. Okay. They had one agent penetrate the NRA. They managed to possibly get some info on the Republicans. They're saying the DC leaks weren't alone. They leaked some material to WikiLeaks. Ultimately, though, it didn't flip the election, and it doesn't mean that our president's been compromised. So let's assume that all of that is actually true. Don't you think that obsessing over that fact for several years' time is a little bit over the top? That people should be a little bit less obsessed with the topic. It's been talked to death for almost 2 years now. Every single day there's been a news report about how bad the Russians are and how much danger we're in because of Russian hackers. But they didn't even manage to swing a state in the election. And by the way, the U.S. does 10 times that. The U.S. has tens of thousands of propaganda bots on every tech platform, sometimes more. We have armies of sock accounts. The big tech firms that control most human communication, they don't work with the Russian government, they work with the U.S. government. And Merkel in the UK, the data sharing states that work with the United States directly in an intelligence capacity, which I believe is the UK, Germany, Sweden, and Belgium, if I remember correctly. They're sort of the big five. I think Australia and Canada too to some extent. There's data sharing. Those are the governments that work with Facebook and YouTube and all of Google's services, Alphabet at its various highest level, Twitter and all these others. These sites work with the Western governments. They don't work for or with Vladimir Putin. What risk is there? Since there's no major risk to society, the fact that people are so obsessed with it is morbid. It doesn't make sense. It's hyperbolic. It's the Red Scare. They're worried about, they're paranoid. It's just like the last wave of the Cold War, which, like, when I'm a little kid, USSR falls. The 90s are sort of ushered in as an era of good feelings. So the first few years I was alive, though, was, basically the height of the Cold War. The height of the Cold War is the 80s. Really, Russia started mass developing enormous numbers of nuclear weapons, and you've got Reagan in there and Star Wars and all this other weird shit. And a lot of people thought they were going to get nuked at any given time. It was way more paranoid than even the 50s or the 60s. Like the 80s, really, it's where it is. Like every other movie is about some Soviet spies. GoldenEye, James Bond and stuff. That's what you got to think about. That's the way people are acting now. Is it not a little bit odd, just a little bit nonsensical to claim that Russia is the big boogeyman that is being claimed by some people? I think it is, and I think Rand Paul is sane. I think it's a good thing that he stood in the way of this. Now, when they inevitably condemn Russia anyway, it won't be unanimous. it'll be, passed in the normal framework of simply needing a simple majority. No, they'll get him. Rand Paul will probably still be the only person standing in the way, and he's going to get flack for it, but I'm going to tell you what. Rand is a smart dude. I think he realizes that the current social panic that we're under, with the Reds under the bed, Putin this, Trump that, everything's falling apart, America will die, that eventually will be destroyed because America will not fall. When it becomes clear to people years from now that the Red Scare bullshit was not the harbinger of doomsday, that it didn't cause a nuclear Armageddon, that our president's not a Russian puppet, and that they're generally safe and okay, they have a job and a meal to eat, the social panic will disappear. That's at the end of the paradigm. Rand Paul's probably setting himself up for a presidential run. He wants to be the one that was sane among a group of people who gave in to social panic, who believed lies. And he probably looks to the Iraq War for this. During the Iraq War era, what happened? Iraq War comes along. Bush is like, we must invade. Saddam's got WMDs. Oh, it's horrible. He's going to get nukes and destroy us. Everyone votes to go to war except for one person, who oddly enough is the person who sponsored this bill, Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is remembered as having been wise for voting against the Iraq War. Likewise, even people like Clinton, from within the same party, he's basically a Democrat, claims to be independent. The DNC won't let him run, but he's basically a Democrat in everything but name. They voted for the Iraq War. Hillary Clinton glowingly endorsed the concept. She didn't even just vote for it like a lot of people. She came out and stood next to Bush and said how wonderful it would be. It's just like her Gaddafi bullshit. Rand Paul has consistently, at least you can't call him a hypocrite. You can say, well, he's a pawn like Trump. He must be in bed with Russia. Oh, he's a traitor. He sold us out. Okay, but at least give him credit for being consistent. He's consistently against meddling in other nations' affairs. The fact is this: Russia doesn't have the money or the manpower or the technological aptitude to fuck around with our elections. You should be worried about them overthrowing the government of Malawi or something like that. That's what they can do. They can't fuck around with our elections, but we can fuck around with theirs. And the deep state here does that every election they have. We meddle in we almost micromanage all other elections. Look, for many people in the U.S. government, they're not consistent. They're hypocrites. They're total sellouts. They'll look and they'll complain about human rights violations while they buddy and buy oil from the Saudis or something like that. So, you're in no position to worry about Russia. It's like, well, Russia's, they censor things, but you encourage big tech firms to do that here on a privatized level. It's a fucking difference. Okay, there the government censors you. Here the big tech firms censor you for the government. What's the difference? Those firms don't work for Russia. And by the way, now that Facebook and all these others are clamping down, it's not like they'd be able to, sell ads anyway. They've started to censor political material so much, it'd be difficult for Russia to do anything. Well, if Russia can't influence you through a big tech platform, it really can't influence you. Who watches TV? Are you worried about Vladimir Putin buying CNN or something? Wouldn't matter. It's already a global network anyway, owned by a multinational that has nothing to do with the United States, so who cares? Now, Vladimir Putin's not a risk to our society. The risk to our society fundamentally is from within. If the United States falls, it'll be because of its own government's ineptitude or corruption. It won't be because Russia nuked us or something. Yeah, there probably will be a nuclear war someday, but I doubt it's going to be any time in the next couple decades, and it's not going to be because Vladimir Putin bought off an election. It's not going to happen that way. Probably be because of sabotage or because of a shittily controlled nuclear system going off on its own because someone entered the wrong line of code. That's how the world probably will end. It's going to be because of a computer or some saboteur who's, a script kiddie. That's what would happen. I'm not too worried about Vladimir Putin randomly pressing the little red button because his Trump puppet got impeached or something. It's not going to happen. Russia's not a compelling threat. Don't worry about when they were talking about 10 years ago, well, China's an up-and-coming competitor to the U.S., and they might hack us. And so, yeah, that's a credible threat. They've got more manpower than we do and almost as much economic power. They're steadily gaining diplomatic sway in East Africa, which is expanding their scope further. They're becoming a credible threat on the world stage. Russia's a former power. Its economy is smaller than that of Italy. Will people please stop doing the Reds under the bed thing? At least have an enemy or a competitor, whatever you want to call them, that is credible. And stop worrying about Russian hackers and bullshit like that. If you're worried at all, don't be so obsessed with it that you look like paranoid idiot. Really, these people, when I see them, they rant on Twitter endlessly. #resist, the Russians control the White House. You look like an idiot. You look paranoid. You look exactly like people. You look like Joe McCarthy. Only Joe McCarthy actually had a few good points. You don't even have that. You're just, you're totally off the wall. And your mind's been cooked by corporate propaganda. They're selling you that story so they can clickbait and make money anyway. It's basically what it's about. That's about all. Peace out.